Okay, we are live. So this is going to serve as a little bit of a primer on framing if this video turns out well. If this video turns out well, then what we'll do is put it up on the web. So we're going to start in here with the PowerPoint. So as I said, this is we are live. So this is going to serve as sorry, got my own monitor up there. All right, so here we go. So this is, as I said, we're going to do an intro here to framing. And basically the idea is we need to challenge the status quo through effective framing, which is based in cognitive sciences, and thus effectively changing public discourse, which is so critical to restoring effective democracy. So basically what we're going to cover is that we have a critical problem, and then we're going to look at the Burke and Walker campaigns as a method of showing that there actually isn't a comparison or a contrast in values being represented. When we talk about just issues, then we are basically demonstrating the same core values, because the conservative moral system is dominant in society today. Why is this a problem? How conservatives are succeeding? The solution is what I call effective framing, plus all of us. How do we effectively frame? Avoiding common mistakes. Framing is the cure. And then where to get your vaccine to be resistant to the dominant conservative frame in public discourse. So we have a critical problem, and that is that current campaign methods are failing to provide us with a progressive vision. And because of that, the conservative corporate message is being constantly and unconsciously reinforced. The net result is that we see empathy and progressive ideas and the entire vision of what progressive stands for disappearing from our society. So here's an example of what I like to call the conservative drumbeat, because it becomes unconscious, and in fact, it is cognitively hypnotic. You repeat it and understand it without even realizing that you're doing so. And to show you an example of that, we're going to go through some key components of the previous gubernatorial election. So the first ad in the election sets the frame. And we've got a quick video here. So this is the first Walker, the first Walker ad, which is, I'm going to switch, here we go, which was called Anthem. And in this, you're going to hear him talk about, the idea that everyone who wants a job can find a job, less dependence on government, individual hard work and pride. And that, in essence, really embodies the conservative idea of self-reliance, that the government is immoral. So here we go with our video. Cue this up here real quick. All right, this is Anthem. Okay, so pretty clear, right? We've got the idea of the conservative moral system, which is that government is immoral, that you have to be self-reliant, disciplined in order to be successful. So let's get back to the PowerPoint here. And okay. So now let's look at the Burke campaign. The Burke campaign started with an ad that basically said, my father had a big idea, Trek Bicycle. Proud to build a great Wisconsin company. Make sure kids have skills and training they need to succeed. And what does that embody? That entirely embodies the idea of the again, the conservative frame, which is government is immoral, is the private sector that creates jobs, and education being something that is there for kids to get a job, nothing else. So everything is about this idea of private job creation. And we've got that video here as well. So we will queue up that one there. And all right, so here we go. So this is going to be its title, Anthem, and listen for those key things that evoke the same conservative values as Scott Walker evoked, which is, again, private over the public, that the idea of job creation in the private sector, and evoking the conservative idea of education, which is a key. Okay, so clearly you can hear, especially at the end there, where she talks about putting people back to work in the private sector. The fact that she's going to, provide kids for education so that they have the skills to get a job. So that's clearly that's we see similarity there. So. To the PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. So we see the first ad sets similar frame. So we have both Mary Burke and Scott Walker are evoking the conservative frame in their campaigns. So here's more evidence of that. So let's take a look at economics. The conservative frame of economics, again, tax and spending plans that increase bloated red tape, making it harder to find jobs. So again, we see evoking the idea of the private sector is immoral because it impedes the freedom of the private to create jobs. That is, again, one of the key components of the conservative frame. Your tax burden has dropped, more jobs created. So we see a metaphor being used there, burden, the idea that taxes are a burden. And if you just relieve that burden, then jobs will be created. So let's look at Mary Burke, opening up new global markets to create jobs. Again, this is all private sector. This is all free market principles here. Private sector approaches in the Department of Commerce created jobs in the private sector. Pretty clear right there. Look at education. Allowing schools to fail means leaving students behind. That is clearly in the conservative frame because it denies the systemic nature of education, and that the reason kids are struggling in education is because they have communities that are struggling, as opposed to it being just about bad teachers or bad schools. Transparency and accountability are all about punishment, providing measurements of how to punish schools and teachers that are quote unquote failing. And then the idea of choice and career ready, again, very much in the conservative frame. Mary Burke, education, the way to a good job, key to the economy, prepared to work hard to realize their dreams, which is really actually very conservative because it implies that if you that the only reason that you don't realize your dreams in America is if you don't work hard. Get it? So if you're poor, you deserve it. You just haven't worked hard enough. And again, she's talking about accountability measures. Doesn't matter if it's for private, just if she's talking about it just in terms of private. She is invoking and reinforcing the entire idea of accountability. So here's a question. We've got a poll up that we're going to put up there as well in your sidebar. If you go to your sidebar, you're going to see a poll pop up there as this screen is up. So whose vision is this for Wisconsin? Just take a minute and read that and see what you think. And then you can cast your vote as soon as you're ready. Okay. So the votes are in, and obviously it sounds like Scott Walker, leading economy, graduates who can compete in the workforce, balance job creation with agriculture and mining. Who is that? Sorry, back to that. Go. That would be the Burke campaign. Nope, where'd it go? Here we go. So that would be the Burke campaign in basically the last week before the election. So isn't that interesting? All right, so why is this even a problem? Why should we care? Well, it's because conservatives know that frames are necessary. They do it really well. They know that it helps communicate outside of issue silos. In fact, virtually every conservative policy that you can name is about two things: small government and personal liberty. If the facts don't reflect the frame a person believes, they reject the facts and keep the frame. That should be clearly obvious. People are also looking for moral connection. Repetition embeds the conservative frame in your brain. That's one of the reasons they do it over and over and over again. So obviously conservative dominance for the last 40 years has led to this situation we're in right now. And as I say, there's a solution, and it's actually doing authentic framing and the people. What you can do, can frame everywhere. Letters to the editor, group lobbying of your local legislators, community forums, talk to family, neighbors, and friends, make those personal connections, write guest op-ed columns in regional papers, connect with other groups outside of your issue, and all that will amplify the progressive vision. And it's important because this is based on cognitive science, which shows us that there's hope. We've all naturally evolved for empathy. There are mirror neurons that have been discovered by Dr. Antonio Damasio in Italy. And there is huge connections with the unconscious world. There we go. And it's been suppressed by this self-interest frame dominance of conservatives. And it really needs to be strengthened by all of us through effective framing. So what's important is that framing is thinking. Descartes was wrong, thought is not rational, requires emotion. Frame use is mostly unconscious. unconscious thought accounts for most of your brain activity. So here's an example of how the unconscious influences your action behavior. So say you're a test subject in a optical receptor study, and you're being shown these very quick flashes of objects to see what you perceive. And so first you're shown this one. Of course, this would be very fast, milliseconds. And then a few milliseconds later, you're shown that. Well, what the test subjects report seeing is this. Not two distinct objects, one object. Now, why is that? It's because your brain unconsciously uses existing information to fill knowledge gaps. It will go back in time to the strongest circuit, which, as we say with framing, is the more that you exercise the circuit, the stronger it gets. The conservative frame, because of that, is the strongest today. That's one of the reasons why we repeat and reinforce messaging without conscious thought. And there's currently no effective counter to the conservative dominance until now, because we are all the solution to this problem. So by learning what authentic framing really is on a large scale, we can empower every person to forward a progressive vision, make the unconscious conscious, effectively pivot framing on issues, thereby changing public discourse. It also will help us avoid common mistakes, such as just the facts don't win votes. Because politics are moral, people use common sense frames, which are dominantly conservative, to define what common sense is. And the facts need context. And most of the context today is conservative. We also have to understand that there's no such thing as a centrist or moderate. People are biconceptual. Okay, they are part progressive and part conservative. Addressing biconceptualism in the progressive frame activates those progressive frames as they think in their brain. It's called neural binding, and it's how we think. And we have to consciously choose frames through effective language to communicate. We have to also understand there's a difference between moral and partisan. Identify the moral frame, find where those biconceptuals are, speak to them in the progressive frame to strengthen it, knowing that the same message in the progressive frame works on every issue. This will help us avoid issue silos. So here's an example of how this can change because of the influence of the conservative frame and the conservative metaphorical moral worldview. So President Obama in 2007, when he was campaigning in Chicago, said this: we have an empathy deficit. And he talked about where the color of your skin still affects the content of your education. He talks about empathy deficits in terms of income inequality. Families lose homes because of greedy lenders. People get sick when they can't afford a doctor, and thus creating empathy and connections with people that way, and evoking our sense of responsibility for others. So now here, 3 years later, when the Affordable Care Act passes, here are his comments on passage of that. And you're going to see in these comments how he has been unconsciously influenced and yields the frame to conservatives. And some people will say that that's going to the middle. It's not going to the middle. It's the fact that President Obama is biconceptually conservative in some aspects of his life. And the constant drumbeat of the conservative frame in Washington affects him. So here's the statement. Once this reform is implemented, health insurance exchanges will be creative, a competitive marketplace where people will be able to purchase affordable, quality insurance. So he's yielded the moral values of healthcare as, instead of being necessary for freedom and something that's fundamentally necessary to even live and pursue a prosperous life, as something that is part of the market. It is the shopping frame, the choice. And if you are not morally disciplined enough to get a job that provides you health insurance, then you don't deserve to have insurance. See how powerful this is? So think of it this way. Conservative framing and messaging has created an epidemic. And what is that epidemic? Here we go. Epidemic is that progressive ideas and vision are dying. It's happening globally. And this is a map of gun ownership in the world. And that is a good measure of conservative values, the whole idea of fear because of self-interest doesn't have you feeling connected with your community and the rest of the world. So you get into the self-preservation mode. So there's a good reflection of that. Framing is the cure. It acts as a cognitive vaccine. The thing is, a small number of people being vaccinated is not going to have very much effect. I mean, if 10% of people get a measles vaccine, it leaves 90% of the population vulnerable. Oop. We lost our screen share. Hold on, let's get back to the screen share. Okay, there we go. Okay. And the thing is that authentic framing works. There's already organizations in really significant parts of the state that are beginning to practice this, and they're having success in local races and political campaigns, particularly progressive campaigns. Senator Vinehart, 2 mayoral races in highly contested areas where there was a well-funded Tea Party challenger or a well-funded establishment corporate Dem incumbent. There's some testimonials there. So not all framing is really framing. We're going to move ahead to some examples of that. So here's what I call unauthentic framing. So here's the NEA evoking the conservative idea of 21st century jobs in their core message. Here's the Frameworks Institute, which charges people hundreds and hundreds of dollars to subscribe to webinars. You pay, I believe it's $150 a year just to have access to the webinars, and then you pay something like $100 per webinar to view them. And here they're talking about the immigration issue, and they're talking about undocumented immigrants being part of the country's economic engine, and not even considering the fact that these are human beings who are just, they are basically wanting to be free. They want to pursue a life of opportunity and prosperity. And here we are talking about them just as part of an economic engine. Just critically bad messaging. And here from Wisconsin Voices, this was actually talked about as of values-based messaging. And yes, values, yes, but this is conservative values. This is about individual freedom to control their health decisions no matter what. It's in the self-interest frame and the market, choosing their health care in the marketplace, as opposed to talking about the freedom to pursue opportunity in life and live in a healthy community where we are all responsible for each other. We're talking about the personal self-interest of choosing health care in the market. So again, critically bad. So I've developed authentic framing for the future in consultation with Dr. Lakoff. Dr. Lakoff has recommended the work that I've done highly, even at the national level. And it's now available to partisan individuals and organizations outside of the 501c3 realm. So campaigns and local democratic progressive organizations that are partisan that want to do really important local campaigning work. So it can connect and empower everyone on one website from one platform. It's for an individual or organization, providing resources and things like live interactive webinars such as this, recorded archives of all the webinars, a bi-weekly Thinking Points journal that will be delivered right into your email, taking up current framing issues, a discussion forum on my website that will provide for interaction between all different issues groups and people all over the nation on the discussion of how to frame something and ideas for messages and concepts and metaphors and things like that. So the bottom line is it is the cure for what ails us. And if you look in your sidebar there now, there is a button that will take you to the website where you can subscribe to this. Again, it will be every month for a year. So that's 12 webinars, 26 bi-weekly newsletters, discussion forum, and you'll have ready access to me. So that, let's get rid of the screen sharing. We'll come back here. So there we go. So you can go to the website. Feel free to ask questions, but this is the place to start. This presentation was just the basics, and as anybody can tell you that has been doing this even for a year, for 2 years, you always have to stay up on this. It's a constant refreshing of your mind, and it also will offset the effects of Alzheimer's because you're exercising new neural circuits and things like that. So there we go. I see there are no questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to send me an email. In addition to going to the subscription page there, that link will take you directly to my website, and you can look around. There's lots to see. There's lots of resources there as well. So have a great day. Thanks for coming, and hope to see you all soon.